In the first 3 months of 2026, China reportedly poured roughly 3.2 billion Chinese yuan into quantum technology, more than it spent across all of the prior year. 1/4 outspending an entire year. If that figure holds up against the primary source, it is the largest quantum funding acceleration any country has publicly reported in this short a window. Before you decide this is either a world-changing shift or an inflated headline, hold on, because both of those readings miss what is actually happening here. The pace at which you fund quantum hardware determines how fast you can iterate. Iteration determines who closes the gap on the physics problems that actually matter. And those physics problems are what separate a quantum computer that exists from one that works at scale. By the time we are done here, you will understand why capital velocity is real leverage in quantum and exactly where it stops buying progress. Why the spending figure alone cannot tell you who wins and what a tripled quarterly budget actually changes about the odds. This is not really a story about a budget announcement. It is about whether raising the floor fast enough lets you reach a ceiling that keeps moving. So let's start with what 3.2 billion yuan actually buys, and why that matters more than it might seem. Quantum hardware is brutally expensive to build and iterate. The centerpiece of any superconducting quantum computer is a dilution refrigerator, a machine that cools qubits to temperatures colder than the vacuum of outer space, colder than anything that occurs naturally in the universe. These machines cost roughly $1 to $2 million each, take somewhere between 12 and 24 months to arrive after you order them, and require specialists to install and operate. The global pool of people who can do this work is measured in the hundreds, not the thousands. And that is before you get to the fabrication side, where qubit chips require modified cleanroom processes that are expensive to run and produce low yields per wafer run. Think of it like Formula One engine development. The parts are expensive, the machinists are rare, and you can only run so many test cycles per season. More money lets you run more cycles, hire more engineers, and bring more machines online. It does not make the physics of combustion easier, but it does mean you learn faster. In quantum, at this stage of the field, money buys iteration cycles. And in an early stage technology, iteration is most of the game. The United States National Quantum Initiative funds roughly $900 million per year in quantum research as of recent appropriations. 3.2 billion yuan translates to somewhere in the range of $440 million at mid-2026 exchange rates. So a single Chinese quarter is coming in at roughly half the entire annual American National Program commitment. Even with significant uncertainty around the exact figure, the direction of that comparison is striking. So yes, capital is real leverage here. The question is how far that leverage actually reaches, because the fundable parts of quantum are real, but they are not the whole game. And this is where the ceiling comes in. The three unsolved physics problems that define deployable quantum advantage are qubit coherence times, error correction overhead, and qubit interconnect fidelity at scale. None of these respond to capital the way hardware iteration does. Take error correction alone. Current estimates in the quantum error correction literature suggest you need roughly 1,000 physical qubits to protect a single logical qubit, the kind you would actually use to run a meaningful computation at the fidelity levels required for practical use. That is not a fixed and settled number. It is an evolving estimate range depending on the approach. But the scale of the problem is established. You cannot buy your way past that ratio. You have to solve it. Coherence times, how long a qubit holds its quantum state before noise destroys it, are measured in microseconds to milliseconds in superconducting systems today. The threshold needed for large-scale error correction to work is significantly higher. Again, money can fund more experiments searching for better materials, better isolation, better control. But the molecule either bonds the way you need it to, or it does not. It is like trying to buy your way to a scientific discovery. You can hire more chemists, build more labs, run more experiments, and all of that matters. But the underlying chemistry does not change because you funded it harder. The lesson from other capital-heavy deep tech fields reinforces this. Fusion energy has received enormous sustained investment for decades. EUV lithography, the technology that now underpins the most advanced semiconductor chips, took decades of seemingly impossible engineering before it worked. In both cases, capital accelerated the engineering layers and then stalled at the physics layers. More money sped the search. It did not change what the search was looking for. So does that mean China's spending surge is just noise? Here's where it gets genuinely interesting, and where the non-obvious argument lives. There's a threshold below which quantum programs are too resource constrained to run the experiments that would let them fail productively. If you can only afford to run a handful of test cycles per year, every failure is painful and slow to learn from. You iterate slowly, you develop intuition slowly. The hard problems stay theoretical because you never accumulate enough experimental runs to make them empirical. Above that threshold, things change. The hard problems become tractable experiments rather than purely theoretical puzzles. You're not solving the physics with money, but you are creating the conditions under which the physics can be solved. Think of it like running a clinical trial. Below a certain sample size, you cannot reach statistical significance. You produce noise, not signal. Above the threshold, every additional data point teaches you something real. China may be trying to cross that line to get its quantum programs to an iteration rate where their experiments stop producing noise and start producing signal. This is a reasoned inference, not a confirmed result. But it is the non-obvious argument at the center of the story, and it is worth sitting with. The clearest reference point for China's actual quantum output is the Jiuzhang photonic quantum computer, whose results were published in peer-reviewed journals in 2020 and 2021. Those are independently verified results in the photonic category of quantum computing, not superconducting systems, which is the dominant track for most leading programs globally. On superconducting systems, where groups like Google and IBM have published the most prominent recent benchmarks, a verified comparison of China's current qubit counts and error rates against the global frontier requires sourcing that is not available here. What the record shows is that China has produced real, peer-reviewed quantum results, and that the gap on superconducting systems to the current frontier is real, but not fully characterized by public data. Which brings us to the number at the center of this whole argument. The 3.2 billion yuan figure for Q1 2026 is reported. The source flags it as requiring verification against the primary funding record. And even if it is directionally accurate, it almost certainly blends central government allocation, provincial government spending, and state enterprise investment, categories that Western reporting systems would separate. Spending announced is not spending deployed. Deployed capital is not results produced. China's quantum investment figures have historically been difficult to parse because they aggregate across levels of government and state industry in ways that do not map cleanly onto something like a US National Science Foundation grant announcement. So is this whole story built on a number that might not be real? No, because the direction of Chinese quantum investment acceleration is confirmed qualitatively by multiple independent analysts tracking this space, even where the specific quarterly figure remains unverified. The argument does not depend on the exact UN figure being right. It depends on the direction being real. And that part has broader support. So what does sustained capital at this pace actually compound into? Over time. In capital-heavy deep tech, the compounding effect of a high iteration rate funding shows up 3 to 5 years after the surge, not in the quarter it lands. The labs that ran more experiments in 2018 and 2019 developed deeper empirical intuitions by 2024. Not because they were smarter, but because they accumulated more reps. The pattern in comparable fields suggests this strongly, even if a single clean citation for quantum specifically is hard to nail down. The European Quantum Flagship committed 1 billion euros over 10 years, a serious program, confirmed as public record. The United States National Quantum Initiative has maintained significant annual funding, but if China sustains its current pace, and that is a real if, its quantum programs in 2028 and 2029 will have accumulated a volume of experimental iteration that slower funded rivals simply cannot retroactively match. You cannot go back and run the experiments you skipped. The empirical intuition is built in real time, or not at all. This is what floor-raising capital actually compounds into. Not a guaranteed lead, but a changed probability distribution on who reaches deployable quantum advantage first, and who defines the physics answers that the rest of the field inherits. Here's my honest read. The triumphalist version, China has already won the quantum race, is not what the evidence shows. The dismissive version, this is all noise, and marketing spend, is not what the evidence shows either. What the evidence shows is a country accelerating into the phase of the competition where capital starts to matter more, right before the phase where it matters less. That timing is not an accident, and the window for rivals to match the iteration rate is narrowing faster than the benchmark comparisons suggest. The real bet is not whether China's money converts directly into a lead. The bet is whether it converts fast enough to change who defines the physics answers the rest of the field inherits. That is different from having already won. And it is different from not mattering. So I want your honest read in the comments. Do you think capital velocity is the real constraint right now? That whoever can sustain this iteration rate wins the quantum race? Or do you think the physics bottlenecks are genuinely money-proof, and this spending surge is building impressive infrastructure for a problem that still has to be solved the hard way? Two real bets. Which one do you back and why? Subscribe here. We are tracking how this specific spending surge translates into lab results over the next 18 months. And when the first verifiable signal appears from a peer-reviewed source, you will want to have already been following this. In Q1 2026, one country reportedly poured more into quantum in 90 days than it had in the entire prior year. The floor just moved. Whether the ceiling notices, that is still the open question.